It's story time, everyone. I'm sure that we've all heard of the term mechanical keyboards before. In fact, I personally have gone through at least a couple of off-the-shelf gaming keyboards or mechanical keyboards too. There is no denying that mechanical keyboards are getting more and more popular. Some time ago I was browsing on Drop and I came across a keyboard called the DNA65. It's got RGB. It's also got a frosted acrylic case. It's a small compact keyboard but still has the arrow keys. And it's only $65. Bye bye bye, 卖图了. So I told my friends about this keyboard that I purchased, and some of them actually responded saying that they actually had a family member or they knew some friends who were into this mechanical keyboard hobby, like into mechanical keyboards. In fact, I got the same reaction from some of my colleagues when I started using the keyboard in the office. And so that got me thinking, if I can geek out about, say for example, the Nerf hobby, or if I can geek out about EDC stuff, like for example, knives, wallets, tritium lanterns, beads, fidget toys, flashlights, then what exactly do people who are into keyboards geek out about? So as a starting point, I went back to Drop, and that led me to more information, which eventually led me to YouTube and also to subreddits. After digesting a rather substantial amount of information and sitting through hours of keyboard sound tests, I decided that the best possible way to understand the psyche of a keyboard enthusiast is to just go all in. And so I set off on a journey to improve the tactile experience and sound of the DNA65 and to document the process along the way. Now, to start the video proper, I feel that this would be the most fitting intro. And that was the sound test of the DNA65 in its stock form. And I'm using quotes because I am by no means a professional in this field. In fact, this is actually my first time doing something like that. It is also worth to say that this video will probably not benefit anyone with experience or knowledge in this field. So if you are someone who is already experienced, then you could consider skipping this video altogether, or you could stay on and laugh at the mistakes that I made as I recount this journey. Also, this video is not a tutorial video by any means. There are many awesome videos out there if you're looking for a tutorial. What this video is really is just my experience and journey of wanting to improve the keyboard so that I can not only physically feel what it's like to have an improved or a good tactile experience, but also to hear it in person. I'm not trying to say that my end product is well made, but you get what I mean. Also, I'll be sharing with you everything that I purchased, every mistake I made, aka every time that I f***ed up, and how much it cost me overall. Okay, let's start. This is everything that I purchased. First of all, it's a set of keycaps from Matrix Keyboard. This is a set of shine-through double-shot PBT keycaps in mint. Next on the list, I purchased a set of upgraded stabilizers. I also bought myself a set of new switches, and these are the Domikey KAILH Box Tactile Cyberpunk switches that I got from Drop. And I went for the purple and clear colorway, and I picked the 67 grams variant. I got a pack of switch films for $5 or 7 Singapore dollars, and these come in a pack of 100 films. I also got some lube, and this is the Krytox 205G0 lube, and through research I found that this is quite possibly the most commonly used lube in the hobby. Next, I got a tube of Super Lube, but this one is a dual purpose lube because I could also use it in many applications when it comes to Nerf modding and the Nerf hobby. Next, I purchased a pair of thin paint brushes, and the recommended size among the hobbyists are size 0 or 00. I decided that one of these would be used for any application of the Krytox 205 grade 0 lube and the other for super lube, because I don't think it's a good idea to mix these two lubes together on the same brush. Next on the list is the lube for springs, and this is a 5ml bottle of Krytox GPL 105 oil. I also purchased a switch opener for $7 or 10 Singapore dollars, and along with that I also got a keycap puller. This generally comes with keycap sets in some keyboards, and there are different styles of keycap pullers, but most enthusiasts recommend using the wire style puller like this one, and this is generally rather cheap at about $3 each. But because they actually come with keycap sets, I'm not going to add this to the total price. I also purchased a switch puller. Now this too sometimes comes with keyboards, but those can be a little bit crappy, so I decided to get one in this particular style. Next, I purchased a pair of flush cutters. Now I do have some flush cutters lying around, but those are actually kind of worn and old and used, so I wanted to buy myself a fresh pair. Next is a jeweler's tool that will help dramatically when you're dealing with the switch stems, and this one has 4 prongs. There is a 5-prong variant, but you want to get the one with 4 prongs. I also purchased a lube station, and this one I got secondhand from Carousel. Carousel is basically like a local sales platform. The experienced viewers can tell by now that there are some stuff in there that is not going to be compatible with the build overall. If you know, you know. If you don't, it's all good. It just makes for a slightly more dramatic video. And here are some other stuff that I used. While some of these are optional, everything actually is still rather practical. So a pair of scissors, a Ziploc bag, this small little plastic bag that I'm using for trash, a screwdriver, and this is a Phillips head screwdriver, some kitchen towels of course. Now for the next few items, I did not specifically call them out in the video, but they are a pair of tweezers that I had lying around. I'm sure almost everyone has a pair of tweezers at home. I also purchased some craft foam from a stationery shop, as well as some band-aids. Now, the band-aids are actually used for what is known as a band-aid mod, and this mod seems to be a must-do for almost every keyboard build. It is said that performing the band-aid mod will drastically improve the overall experience of any keyboard. But once again, this is not a tutorial. If you guys are interested in finding out what exactly a band-aid mod is, please just Google it or search it on YouTube and you will find your answer. You know, you could just get band-aids from around the house, right? But because I noticed that most of the time, whenever a band-aid mod is performed, it is done with these fabric type of band-aids or plasters, and in my household, we generally have those plastic, waterproof kind of plasters. So that meant that I had to specifically go out to get a box of these. And so in order to be fair, I have to add this to the overall cost as well. So I started by removing the keycaps with the keycap puller. Next, I opened up the board by removing the screws on the underside of the board using the Phillips head screwdriver. I should point out also that there are screws hidden under the rubber feet. Now, the DNA65 is a stacked acrylic styled keyboard, which means exactly what it sounds like. Layers of acrylic are stacked to create the case of the keyboard. This is the PCB, and this is the plate. The plate is made of aluminum, anodized to a sort of like a brass or gold color. This PCB features north-facing LEDs, but it seems that most keyboard enthusiasts prefer south-facing LEDs because there's some interference between PCB boards with north-facing LEDs and using cherry profile keycaps. Just a quick note on this topic. For the uninitiated, there are multiple keycap profiles. Some of the popular profiles are Cherry, XDA, SA, and OEM, just to name a few. I guess a very simple and layman way to explain this is that different keycap profiles have different shapes. These different profiles were all designed with features such as ergonomics in mind. The DNA65 that I have and the Matrix keyboard keycaps that I bought both feature OEM keycap profiles. And if you look closely, this is where my first mistake lies. The upgrade switches that I bought, which are the Domikey KAILH Box Cyberpunk tactile switches from Drop, are a 5-pin switch, but the PCB switch sockets are 3-pin sockets. And so the solution is to remove the 2 plastic pins of the Cyberpunk switches. I just used the flush cutters that I got to get that done. Alternatively, you could use a small utility knife or a nail clipper to get the job done. However, you have to do this to every single switch that you're intending to use on the keyboard. Anyway, moving on. There seemed to be some lube on the PCB around the areas where the stock stabs were located, so I just cleaned it up very lightly with a kitchen towel. And next I'm going to focus on everything to do with the switches. So I took out the lube station, I put the brushes in place, I readied the Krytox 205 grade 0 lube, and for some reason I decided to work on just one switch first, and I'm glad I did that because the switch opener that I got does not work with box switches. So at this point of time, I learned that there are two different makes of mechanical switches. The quote-unquote cherry type, which are like your GATERONs, your cherries, your KAILHs, and everything upward from there. And then there are the box style switches. Being new to this, I didn't even identify that there was a difference in the way they were actually made. Anyway, to be honest, I felt quite sian. And while I could open up the box switches with a precision screwdriver, I honestly didn't want to have to open all 70 switches in that painstaking manner. So off again I went to Carousel since it was probably going to be the fastest way to procure something, and I looked for another switch opener. I confirmed with the seller that the switch opener could actually open up both styles of switches. After that, I decided to take a closer look at the PCB board, and remember earlier I mentioned that the experienced viewers are going to notice some compatibility issues? Well, it turns out that the stabilizers that I bought, the Durock V2 stabs, are PCB mounted stabs, but this keyboard uses plate mounted stabs. So yeah, I guess this turned out to be a night of spending even more money due to my stupidity and my noobness. Fast forward a few days later and the items arrived and I was back at it again. I'm just showing the Durock V2 stabs at this point just to rub more salt into my own wound and tell myself, you're an idiot for not reading up more before spending money. Okay, I took out the films and got them ready and tried out the switch opener and it worked. This is what the bottom housings of both switches look like side by side. The left side is the GATERON style housing and the right side is the Domikey KAILH box housing, and immediately you'll notice that they are quite different, which means that, yup, another mistake here. The films that I bought won't be compatible with the box switches because of its design. Oh well, as a consolation, I read online that box switches don't require any filming, so that's good I guess. Anyway, these here are the new stabs. They are Everglide Panda plate mounted stabs that cost me $7 or 9 Singapore dollars. I'm pretty sure they're used, or maybe the seller was just trying to clear stocks cause I believe this is rather cheap. And this here is the new switch opener I bought for $6 or 8 Singapore dollars. It's made of aluminum and snaps together with magnets and it's pretty cool. Back to the switches. I went ahead and clipped off the two plastic pins of all 70 switches into the little trash bag and then started disassembling every switch while separating the bottom housing, top housing, stems and springs. The springs went into the Ziploc bag. After opening up all the Cyberpunk box switches, I decided to lube up the springs. I added about 6 drops of the Krytox GPL 105 oil into the bag, blew some air into it to puff up the bag, and sealed it up. Then I started shaking the bag for about 2 minutes to get the oil evenly spread across all the springs. I set the bag of springs aside and then it was time to start lubing the switches. I'll say it again, this is not a tutorial video, so I'm not going to tell you how to lube the switches. Besides, it was my first time, so why would anyone want to take advice, much less watch a tutorial from a complete noob? Oh, by the way, lubing box switch housings is slightly different than lubing up cherry style switch housings. I went by pure intuition of I just need to apply a very thin layer of lube on every surface that will come into contact with each other except for the little legs on stems, because I've only ever watched Teha Type's lubing tutorial video and the switches that he featured in that video were cherry styled switches. Again, at this stage when I'm lubing these switches, I only knew of the difference between cherry and box styled switches just a few days prior. Anyway, this is me lubing up all the bottom housings with a thin layer of Krytox 205 grade 0. Next I started putting the springs back into place. I'd like to say that it's quite a feat to separate springs from each other once they punch up within the Ziploc bag. After that, I started lubing up the stems with the help of the jeweler's tool. The tool is super handy in this situation and I don't think it would have been as enjoyable of an experience had I not purchased it. As I lube each stem, I place them onto the spring. This part of the process was the one that took the longest time because I was trying hard to be careful not to lube the little legs of each stem. Why do you not want to lube those legs? Well, from my research, it's because lubing the legs will soften or smoothen the tactility of the switch, and these switches are tactile switches. I want to feel the tactile bump. So yeah. But the legs are really small and it is easy to accidentally get some lube on them. Maybe it's not that difficult to avoid them, but you know, I'm a noob. This part took way longer than I expected, so I ran out of space on my SD card. I had to transfer all the data out before I could carry on recording. Anyway, it's a rather straightforward process here. Once the stems are all lubed up, the next step in the process is to lube the top housing of the switch and then snap it all back into place. After all the switches have been put back together, I just could not resist and I started to depress each and every one of these switches. In my mind, I told myself, oh, you know, I'm just helping to spread the lube a little bit more, but I don't know if it actually works like that. And here I'm just going crazy and enjoying the sweet tactile feel, which is the result of the past few hours of lubing these switches. Now that the switches are done, I decided to move on to the stabs. I got the Everglide Panda stabs, the Krytox 205 Grade 0 lube and the Super Lube ready and went to work. These stabs don't have the extra legs at the bottom, so no cutting is necessary here. I started by lubing up the inner walls of the stab housings with some Krytox 205 Grade 0 and then inserting the stems into the housings, paying close attention that the orientation is correct. Next, it's Super Lube time. I used the other brush and went to town on the stab wires. Here I was trying to replicate the way Teha Types does it in his stab lubing tutorial video. After each wire is lubed, I complete the stab assembly and move on to the next. In general, stabs are used to support and balance your spacebar, enter, backspace and shift keys. By the way, that's also why I had those keycaps ready and off to the side. Next, I wanted to do two things. Perform the Band-Aid mod and to also test the lube and assembled stabs for rattling. So I grabbed 5 of the stock GATERON brown switches and assembled them to the plate and the PCB, one in each of the 4 corners and one in the middle to act as a sort of guide and to provide support, and then performed the Band-Aid mod. After that, I installed the stabs onto the plate and installed the switch to each respective slot. I put the respective keycaps onto the switches and tested for any rattling of the stabs. Gotta be honest with you guys, I was quite happy with the result. Then again, either I suck at identifying what rattling stabs sound like, or I have an immense level of beginner's luck. Cause I honestly couldn't hear any rattling sounds. Testing the stabs in this way allows you to identify any rattling and also allows you to quickly access the stabs if you need to add or remove lube, instead of the need to completely disassemble everything just to do something to one stab. Moving on to the next step, and that is to install the Domikey KAILH box Cyberpunk switches into every single slot. I installed the switches in a snake or zigzag type of pattern going from left to right, top to bottom, and at the same time I removed any GATERON switch along the way. Next, I visually checked that all switches were seated correctly in the plate and the PCB slot. Then I connected the PCB to my laptop to check if all switches were working. I also tested out the function key, and at this stage I only remember the function key combination that would change the RGB light modes, so that's what I did. Sorry guys. However, I noticed that the switch for the letter V was not working, so I took it out and checked if the pins were damaged. Turns out that the switch was fine, I just needed to make sure it was seated slightly deeper. Finally, it was time to reassemble the keyboard. I'd actually measured and cut out some craft foam that would sit in between the PCB and the bottom of the case. This is done in many keyboard builds to help dampen any vibrations and sounds. Because this PCB has RGB backlighting, I made sure that the piece of foam I cut out would not interfere with the lights. This is a very simple process. Just take your foam, cut out the appropriate size and place it at the bottom of the board inside the case. For this particular board, one layer of craft foam was more than enough. Then, screw everything back together. Since this is an acrylic case, I was careful not to go overboard to prevent any accidental stripping of the screw ports. The last step is to install the keycaps. I decided to mix and match the old and new keycaps and decided on this particular layout. I think it looks cool. I might change it in future, I don't know. And finally, one last key test. And I just had to try typing on it. I just couldn't resist. I know you're eager to find out whether there has been any improvement, so allow me to first repeat the intro typing section so that you can recall what it sounded like in the stock form, and then follow that up with the sounds from the improved keyboard. Now, to wrap up this video and offer my final thoughts. I knew that the keyboard world was a big one, but I honestly did not expect it to be this big, this vast, and this diverse. There's so many things to consider when you're thinking of building your own keyboard, like
what's the keyboard size? 60%, 65%, TKL, etc. Do you want RGB? Does RGB matter to you? Is it going to be per key RGB? What about RGB backlights? North or south facing LEDs? Is it a solder or hot swap PCB? 3-pin or 5-pin sockets? Is it going to be an optical switchboard? What about a split spacebar module? Does it have Bluetooth? What's the material of the case? What's the color of the case? What's the mounting type? What's the weight of the keyboard? What's the material of the plate? Does it use plate mounted or PCB mounted stabs? Can I configure the keys? Is it QMK or VIA compatible?
And when we talk about switches, do you want linear, clicky, or tactile?
What's the actuation force of the switch? What's the material of the housing? What's the material of the stem?
Oh yes, and of course, keycaps.
What's the profile of the keycap? What are the colors? What's the font? Are they going to be shine through? Is it going to be double shot? What's the material? POM, ABS, PBT? Does this keycap set offer full compatibility with my keyboard layout?
And apart from this, there's still many different layers, many different factors to take into consideration if you're going really deep into the hobby. For this particular keyboard, one of the key focus that I had was to improve the sound. Therefore, everything that I did, everything that I researched on was all geared towards that particular end goal. So I had to take into consideration the kind of switch that I was going to use. What is the keycap material going to be like? Do I add foam? Do I not add foam? Because in a way I had free play, but I was working in a sandbox because my keyboard was already a pre-built keyboard. As long as you know or you're able to identify exactly what you're going for in a keyboard build. For example, if you want something that is really thocky or something that is really, what's the term that they call it, like clacky, then you want to work towards that direction and you want to make sure that everything that you do, no matter how slight it is working towards that end goal. Yeah, it's really interesting because even the smallest piece will make some changes some way, somehow, whether or not it's going to be a tactile feel, whether it's going to be a physical kind of feedback, or it's going to be an oral feedback. So all in all, I spent a grand total of 287 US dollars or 385 Singapore dollars. But if I subtract the cost of those items that I bought incorrectly or those that are not compatible with this build, then it brings the total price slightly lower to 257 US dollars or 343 Singapore dollars. I must say that so far I have enjoyed the journey, and the best part is that I get to reap the rewards, because yeah, I'm actually quite satisfied with the result. I find something very therapeutic about building keyboards, in particular the lubrication part. I guess if there's anything that I can liken it to, it's probably gonna be the same kind of therapeutic feeling I get when I'm weaving a paracord bracelet, for example. It's one of those activities that go well with a nice drink and some really good music. In fact, it can also be a really cool couple activity. I'm sure that some of you will think that, yeah, this is quite an expensive thing to be doing. I mean, after all, yeah, I bought a pre-assembled keyboard, slightly cheaper quality, I guess, and then spend another big lump sum of money on upgrade parts and then having to spend a lot of time to try and upgrade the thing. But after taking in all that information and actually going through the process of learning about it, I dare say that it's actually quite an acceptable price point. Of course, there are keyboards that are going to be on the premium level, the high-end stuff, and of course on the other end of the spectrum there's going to be really cheap stuff as well, but mine's right smack in the acceptable range. To put it into a different perspective, think of it as purchasing, say for example, a new pocket knife. So you get a new pocket knife and then you look at it and it's great. But then, you know, over time you feel like, I want to get new scales for this thing. I want to get a deep carry pocket clip. I want to get a nice knife case for it, for example. Or maybe even like getting lube for it just so you can maintain it. And when we talk about maintenance, you're going to get, say for example, a sharpening tool. So yeah, hopefully with that example, I was able to put it into a different perspective for you. To me, basically it's the same idea, just a completely different realm altogether. We've now come to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching all the way throughout, especially if you are someone who is, like I mentioned, an experienced person in the whole world of keyboards. And to those who are not as experienced, or if you're someone that is thinking and considering about getting into the world of keyboards, then hopefully this video offered you some insight and possibly a chance for you to learn from my mistakes as well. A thumbs up or a like would be nice if you've enjoyed the video or you enjoyed the content that I make. And of course, a sub would really help out as well. If I didn't manage to earn your sub through this video, that's okay. I promise I will continue working on the content and hopefully one day I will be able to earn that sub. Last but not least, I would like to plug myself. If you would like to support the channel outside of YouTube, you can check this link up here to my Patreon page. There are exclusive patron-only content as well as exclusive patron-only giveaways from time to time. And that is actually one of the best ways to support the channel as well. If you're wondering what I'm gonna do with the unused switch films as well as the Durock V2 stabs, well, I ordered a KBD67 Lite kit and I'll be using those in that build. After going through this experience, I have a lot more respect for the mechanical keyboard world, its community, and its ecosystem. As I sign off, I thought it'd be fun to bring this guy back into frame. Thanks again everyone, and I will catch all of you in the next slice.